At C.H. Vallos and Associates, we've been proudly serving the greater Stark County community for over 78 years. Locally owned, we cover your home, auto, business, and life insurance along with your group benefits. Our partnership with auto owners has allowed us to span not only Ohio, but throughout the entire country. Did you know that Auto Owners, an A++ rated company by AM Best and a Fortune 500 company, has ranked C.H. Vallos and Associates a top 10 insurance agency in the state of Ohio? From your basic home and auto needs to insuring some of the largest companies in America, there's a reason people choose C.H. Vallos and Associates and Auto Owners. Our dedication and passion for our clients and their coverage is part of our commitment to excellence. For all your insurance coverage needs, there's only one call to make, and that's C.H. Vallos and Associates, located at 1302 South Main Street in North Canton. Contact us at 330-494-2776 today and see the difference in customer satisfaction.
All right, here we are on another episode of 1372 Show, the QB and the OG. I'm TJ Downing, and our partner Jim Ballard still out. Want to give everybody a little bit of a heads up. Jim's back in action. He's out of the hospital. He was down there with COVID pneumonia for a couple weeks, and so we got the big guy out of the hospital. He's healing up. We'll have him back here in a couple weeks. Joined by a special guest here with me today, filling in, Andy Alleman. We'll talk more about him here in just a second, but some more updates. Want to give a special shout out to Harmon's Pub, also the Quarry, and also our friends over at Hall of Fame Village, powered by Johnson Controls, hosting us here over the last couple weeks. We've had some great guests come on, Mike Levy and Ann Graffis. Shout out to them for joining us, kind of giving us updates on what's going on here within the grounds. Today we're live inside of Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium. And when we kind of first started this thing months back, I always kind of knew that eventually I was going to come across a guy that I played with or played with me. I've had one of my running backs come on. I've had guys come on that I looked up to that was kind of idols to me, through my father and some of the guys that played in the NFL alongside him. We've had Mike Ken come on. We're going to talk a little bit about him here in a second. And he had 251 starts at offensive tackle in the NFL. Nobody else has started more games at offensive tackle than Mike Ken. He's tied with Lomas Brown, who just got inducted to the College Football Hall of Fame. So we've had Mike come on. And then I knew I was going to get a guy that I actually competed against, man. Goes all the way back to our days in high school. Andy Alleman, a great former player at North Canton Hoover, also at Massillon, and then went on and starred at Akron and in the NFL. My man, our days go back to North Canton Hoover, Glen Oak, that matchup there. Our towns are right next to each other. We never played Week 10. I don't know why, because I always felt like Glen Oak and Hoover was more of a rivalry than us playing Perry and obviously you guys in Jackson in Week 10. But, man, it's fun for me to talk to a guy that I competed against. We were just talking. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
It is pretty crazy, and I think it's funny for me personally being back here at Tom Benson Stadium, previously Fawcett, to you and I, where you and I played against each other, North Canton and Glen Oak respectively, and then when I was at Massillon, played McKinley here, and then my first ever professional game was actually the Hall of Fame game.
Wow.
Versus the Steelers, of all people. So you're, a kid growing up in Northeast Ohio, you hate the Steelers, you love the Browns, and it's just crazy memories here to have played here in high school twice and then in the NFL and all the wonderful things they're doing here through the Hall of Fame with the Hall of Fame Village and everything going on. It's pretty exciting.
Now, you were drafted by the Saints, right?
Correct. I was drafted in the third round in 2007. I was the 88th pick. I was the fourth guy taken at my position, which was offensive guard.
I got to think, that had to have been some serious emotion for you to come full circle in your career from, coming out as just a youngster in high school, just a teenager, to stepping on the field here in a Hall of Fame game, wearing that NFL patch, being back in an area that you know so well. That sparked a lot of emotions, didn't it?
100%. And even when I go back to the draft night, at the time, they had the first, second, third round on day one and rounds 4 through 7 on day 2. Now they've broken that up for money, advertising, just to kind of create the hype over the course of several days. So by the time I actually got the phone call with the Saints, I remember it vividly, it was 10:48 at night, and we were in the middle of the third round. So it was almost 11 o'clock at night when I got drafted, and then to find out on the schedule that the first preseason game was the Hall of Fame game here at that time, Fawcett Stadium, was like, wow, this is crazy. And then Tom Benson was the owner of the Saints. So then I came back for the rivalry game, which I think is through, a third party or the U.S., American, or maybe through the Army, Armed Forces, something like that, where it was highlighting Massillon versus McKinley. And I got some award, along those lines with the rivalry game. And I saw then Tom Benson, who then cut my checks
Right.
and paid for me as a player, all in this stadium. So it was just kind of crazy how the game was crazy. There were a lot of fans there, knowing the stadium, being in the locker room, getting dressed. It was definitely a moment of nostalgia for sure.
So you talk about that game in Fawcett. We played against each other. That would have been back in like 2000. I believe you guys won 14-13. I know you guys did, because Chris Vallos and Kurt Lukens, those guys, they'll never let me live it down. They're like, hey, listen, you never beat us. And remember that game? We beat you by 1 point, because you know those are terrible. We'll talk more about some of your wins and losses throughout your career, but to me, you lose by 1 or 2 points, you're sick to your stomach. I'd rather get my butt kicked by 20 or 30 points, because at that point, everything went wrong. With one like that, it was, hey, we missed an extra point. But you had that was like a breakout game for you as far as maybe your recruiting would go for the next level, playing on Saturdays. I mean, I think you had 4 or 5 sacks that game. You really kind of started at that defensive end spot. That wasn't where you ended up playing when you got to college. But, I mean, that whole process, how did a big key game like that, all of a sudden you're getting the questionnaires in the mail and that process for you? How was it?
It was great. It was a really, really fun game for sure, among many in my career. As you mentioned earlier, Glen Oak was a really solid team. You guys were a great team, had a lot of stars on the team, and it was a really competitive game. And just going through that recruitment process, to your point of the questionnaires and the mail, I was just a kid who grew up in Greentown, Ohio, by the Akron-Canton Airport, this small house, one older brother with my mom and dad. And so for us, it was all very much a learning experience. My dad didn't go to college. My mother did, but she was a school teacher. So for us, it was like, what is this? This is crazy. What is, kind of getting sent to everybody versus all the personal notes and things like that. So, yeah, it was an incredible process. It was a fun game, and it was a great experience.
When you start talking about growing and evolving as a player, I know that you were a weight room junkie, right? Different philosophies now. I mean, we talk about how things have changed. Back when we played, it was squat, power clean, bench, be strong, run sprints. That's it. Now you see this hit training and this explosiveness stuff. I mean, what were your thought processes as far as, how am I going to develop Andy Alleman to be the best football player on the field when I take it?
Well, I think if I put myself in the context of a 16, 17, 19, 20-year-old, it was really just following the advice of the coaches I had at the time, right? It wasn't a lot of looking outside the scope of what was being brought, that, hey, these are the things you should do. To me, it was really a matter of, am I doing those to the best of my ability? Am I going above and beyond? But I think if you fast forward to now, I'm 38, and just looking at even how I try to stay in shape and things like that, I do think it gets to a point a little bit of diminishing returns. I think at the end of the day, if you want to get strong, you have to move heavy stuff around.
Yeah.
And so deadlifts, squats, overhead press, things that kind of maximize just being able to be strong and powerful. And there's certainly aspects of being able to do, they call prehab instead of rehab, so you're not getting injured if there's tightness and posture, things of that nature. But, I think in one degree, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But in another degree, how can you continue to evolve? So I think it's that balance of, if you start to go all the way into the weeds of something that's altogether different and altogether new, it's like, don't we still have to be strong and powerful and fast and just move people around or tackle or hit? So I think if you take the fundamentals of the game and the physicality of the game, you definitely have a different type of athlete on the field today, which I think a lot of that is just nutrition and supplements and things of that nature. But I also think that a deadlift is a deadlift.
Right.
You're moving something heavy in some range of motion, right?
You obviously, talking about that, have lost a ton of weight since you played. I've probably dropped 35 to 40 pounds since my days. What do you attribute that to? I know one thing for me, looking at some of these older players, especially guys around that 50, 60-year age. They say, listen, if you don't do it right when you get done, it gets harder as you get older. We know how our bodies kind of change. What have you done? Where were you at? I mean, were you a 310, 320 guy? Were you low 300s? And what have you done to get where you're at now?
I was 295, 300. That's what I kind of played at. When I weighed in at the combine, I was 305, but I may have been 305 for 30 seconds. You know, it was always, number one, a struggle for me to keep weight on. So kind of the whole presupposition I had from moving from defense to offense was, can I maintain great athleticism and then learn the position, which would project me to be a higher offensive lineman instead of defensive lineman. But with that, you also have to just be a bigger guy because you have mass on mass moving bodies around. So it was always, I kind of just maxed out my frame. So I think the first 20-ish pounds were just easy to come off because I'm not just drinking like shakes that are basically like concrete, right?
Right.
That you're just throwing just literally anything into. And then the second part of it was just being disciplined and to your point, getting the weight off early. And then for several years there, I kind of stabilized around 245, 250. Now I'm down around 230, 235. And probably over the next couple years, I'll probably want to get down even a little more around 220 because I'm closer to 40 now than I am 30. And just, you know, maintain a healthy lifestyle. Again, it's not overly complex. I just try to, you know, eat well. I don't go about weighing things and going nuts on a bunch of supplements. I just kind of stick to the basics, try to get in the gym, and just a lot of just kind of common sense stuff. People call it, you know, intermittent fasting. I call it just skipping dinner.
Yeah,
you know, so
right.
it's not really that complicated, right? You kind of cut out the garbage food, the sugar, the obvious stuff. I don't really drink pop, and I'm not a big drinker. So it just becomes, some of it is just an evolution over time of smaller tweaks, and now it's just a matter of just kind of maintaining things.
If we're talking North Canton and we're talking weightlifting, man, we got to talk about Judd Logan. Judd Logan, God rest his soul, the Logan Family Foundation, close to both of us. Judd did so many great things for so many different athletes, so we just want to make sure that the Logan family knows that our thoughts and prayers are with them. Our partners over at Vallos Associates and the Cigar Lodge, appreciate you guys joining us as always, and shout out to Jim Ballard as he's on the mend. But today here on the 1372 show, the QB and the OG, live inside of Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium, I'm joined by Andy Alleman. Andy, when you go to a school like Massillon, how does that prepare you for the Division I college level? I mean, not a whole lot of high school kids get to play in a venue like that, and then also in front of maybe 5, 6, 7 to 10,000 people on a weekly basis.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think in one sense it prepares you in just having a legitimate off-season training program, coaching, the discipline, the rigor, the structure. But in another sense, it's a massive jump. You know, I'm sure as you remember going from Glen Oak to Ohio State, even when I think of going from Division I college to the NFL, both jumps were so significant. I still think that that Division I high school to Division I college slightly is even just a little bit bigger than Division I college to the NFL. So in one sense, yes, because you're in more of a structured environment where some high schools, they really don't even have a legitimate lifting program, training, off-season, diet, exercise. So a lot of that helped. And to your point, some of it with just bigger crowds, high-pressure games, playing against McKinley, Cleveland, St. Ignatius, these big games, stuff like that, the playoffs. But, you know, you're 17, 18 years old, and when you have someone who's 20, 21 years old put their hands on you,
Yeah,
it's a different thing because you're also at an interesting trajectory just as a young man, where some people hit puberty and mature, and they have beards in the 7th grade, and other people they don't kind of peak until maybe early college.
late bloomers.
Yeah, and so you kind of get this weird age where, to me, it was a significant jump, even with all of the great preparation that we had with Coach Shep as his staff at Massillon, Coach Studer as the weight coach. But it was definitely a significant jump. And for me, it was interesting because I started out at the University of Pittsburgh, and at the time, they were part of the Big East, where you still had the Miami Hurricanes, Virginia Tech, Boston College. We'd play non-conference games versus Texas A&M and some other big-time schools. So when you're in there, I mean, you're going against some legit, NFL caliber type players. So for me, it was still a big jump, but in another sense, it did prepare me.
I forgot that you had started out there at Pittsburgh. Talk about the decision that led you to Akron. We know now with transfer portal stuff, I mean, and NIL, the entire college landscape from what you and I once knew it or played and saw it is different. But you were recruited as a defensive end, right, to Pittsburgh, and then ultimately made the jump to offensive line. Talk about the move from Pittsburgh to Akron and the transition from becoming did you even play any offensive line when you were in high school? I mean, it's not the easiest thing to do. Some people think, oh, well, you're used to rushing an offensive lineman. Now just do what the offensive lineman did to you back. It's not that simple.
It's definitely not that simple. I think people think they're just big lugs out there
right.
falling on each other, but it's not, to your point, it's not quite that simple. So I think the net of it was I had several offers coming out of high school. I had like 22 Division I offers. Most of them were around that defensive end, outside linebacker type, philosophy. A couple offered me as a fullback. And believe it or not, when I went to a passing camp at West Virginia, the offensive line coach said, if you come here, I'll make you an All-American guard. And I laughed at him. I'm like, but I'm definitely not playing on the offensive line, so we can pass on that. But I played no offensive line my entire life. I played a number of different positions, but certainly that wasn't one of them. So when I was at Pitt, I got on the field as a true freshman. There were only a couple guys that got on the field. It was Larry Fitzgerald, who's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, and Tyler Palco, who was a quarterback. Our quarterback at the time had gotten into some trouble, and then it was myself. And then essentially everyone else in our class redshirted. So I took great pride in that, and then played as a true sophomore on the D-line, and then was in the mix vying for a starting position at even like a 3 technique, moving down inside in a 4-3 defense that they ran there. But at that point, to make a long story short, my old high school coach at Massillon, Rick Shepis, was the first to suggest, he's like, you're kind of at an impasse here. You could finish up, graduate, Pitt's a great school academically, get your degree, you've been playing, you can continue to play. Or you could go to the coach, ask to be redshirted, move to the O-line, and hedge a bet for a longer-term play, all that was speculative, to try to put yourself in a better position, on the national stage to get in the NFL. And so, however old I was at that time, a 19-year-old or 20-year-old or whatever, I just said, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I went to the coach, and he's like, no, you're not going to move. You're going to play on the D-line, right?
Yeah,
because
you're stuck.
You're part in this deal, and this is kind of how we have you trajected and whatnot. So then I said, okay, well, I'm going to leave. But at the time, I had no idea the buzzsaw I was going into because of all of the NCAA rules, which is entirely different, to your point, of the transfer portal. So I had a couple things working against me. One, I was transferring in the fall. So when you go Division I to Division I, you automatically had to sit out a year. Also, our school was on semesters. So if I wasn't enrolled by the add drop period of the school I was going to, you had to sit out an additional year. And the head coach, if you transferred in conference, you had to sit out an additional year. Or if he had some arbitrary list for recruiting purposes or whatever the case may be, competition, he could say, hey, he's also not allowed to go to these schools that I deem, he's not allowed to go to. So they didn't release me from my scholarship. And I actually met with my father, with the athletic director at the time, the head coach, and they basically said, you can leave, but we're not going to release you. So part of me transferring into Massillon was to give myself the best opportunity, the most scholarships, to make an informed decision, and then ultimately chose Pitt. Whereas all I was trying to do at that point for myself was to give myself the best opportunity at the time for what I felt was the next level. And so I left a full ride scholarship on the table. And getting into Akron, which is kind of an entirely separate story, I wasn't allowed to talk to J.D. Brookhart, who came from Pitt and was the receivers coach. So most people think on paper, they say, oh, J.D. Brookhart came from Pitt. Andy knew J.D. when he was at Pitt, so then he went to Akron. He's from Northeast Ohio. But that's not how it worked. I never talked to J.D. Brookhart at Pitt because, as you know, in college, offense and defense are kind of they're a team within a team. And so legally, I wasn't allowed to speak with him. So I had to enroll as a regular student and everything else. So by the time I got to Akron, I was enrolling as a regular student. I was paying for school. I was living at my parents' house. I was redshirting, and I was playing on the offensive line because I thought I could play in the NFL.
Wow. Talk about taking the long road, man.
Yeah, and so, thank God that, 3 years later, I redshirted that year, played on scout team, etc. And then I was a 2-year starter my junior and senior year, and then I was a third-round pick, and, it all worked out. And then, thank God, I was a vested NFL veteran, got 3 full credited seasons, made all the money I was supposed to make, player performance stuff, signed a second contract, and then had some lingering injury stuff, particularly my lower back, that ultimately I said, all right, I'm going to cash in the chips. And my wife at the time, my fiance, things started to pick up, so I was ready to just kind of say, hey, you know what, I had a good run, made some good money, invested. I'm going to cut my losses and cash out.
Yeah, you can't put a price on health either, man. So I think you made the right choice there. It's interesting. Most people, I just had this conversation with somebody the other day, they just know the transfer portal now. They don't realize that years back, I played with a guy, John Kerr from St. Ignatius. He sat out 2 years when he left Indiana to go to Ohio State because of the 1 year plus 2 for being in conference. I mean, to lose that as a player, we know we're only guaranteed so many years of eligibility. That's just a heck of a transition to make, and it's a tough choice for a kid nowadays to have to make, or back then, and even nowadays, you're almost, it looks like kids are shying away from competition, but that's not the case. Sometimes it's just not the right fit for you, and sometimes you feel like maybe that guy that you trusted, that had your best interest at heart, maybe those feelings kind of change, and as we grow up, we kind of learn things about people, and our thoughts change towards those people. It's funny, the last conversation I had with Jay Rohr, he looked at me and he said, do you remember when Tyler Palko kicked our ass in the Big 33 game? You brought up Tyler Palko. He had a great career there. But when you start to think about your memories at Akron, Jay's there, Reggie Corner's there, you're there, you got a guy like Mike Donaldson, Brian White, the Mansfield guys. That was a change. You guys kind of changed the look of what Akron was considered, and you guys won the conference and kind of started a trend there. And even the landscape of the MAC back then, I mean, Ben Roethlisberger was playing at that time. He's still just now finishing his career. He's got himself a playoff game after that Chargers-Raiders game last night. But the MAC was super competitive. But you guys came in there, and it just felt like it was a Stark County group doing what they were supposed to for the local Akron Zips Division I college football team. What an experience that was, man.
It was incredible. And a small caveat on Ben Roethlisberger, I was at Pitt in college when he was playing for the Steelers.
Wow.
So that gives you some context on his career, because they had UPMC, and part of the recruiting shtick was if you're in college practicing at Pitt, you're practicing at pro facilities that share it with the Steelers. So that's a funny little anecdote on that. And then Reggie Corner was funny because we played against each other, Massillon-McKinley, and then we were on the same team at Akron. And then he went to the Bills in the AFC, and I was with the Dolphins. And then we played against each other. I have a funny little note on that. I was the wing on extra point, point after.
He's coming off the edge.
And he's coming off the edge, and I told him, I said, hey, man, look, you're not going to block it. Just relax. You know what I mean? He gives me 1-2 step, and I jammed him as hard as I could and blasted him. And he's like, what? What's up, man? And I said, no, man, you're the enemy. What? Don't. What are you talking about?
Mental warfare.
Oh, yeah, it was great. We were laughing at it after the game, so takes a couple steps. I hit him as hard as I could, and I said, hey, man, you're the enemy.
Yeah.
Wrong uniform. But, coming back to Akron, in this weird, ironic sense, it was, I guess for me, in my mind, it was always kind of trying to play the underdog, slighted guy, and saying, hey, even if I have to take, you mentioned the long road or whatever that is, the irony of I'm in my parents' house, and it's like one for the city, one for Northeast Ohio, the whole, even just the industry, the rubber back in the day, the steel mills in Western Pennsylvania, just the mentality of one for the people, one for the blue collar guy. And then also in my own individual journey, it was great because that was a tricky year, our junior year. We always won when we had to. And you mentioned a lot of great names, Brian White, Jay Rohr, Mike Donaldson, several folks. So Luke Getsy came over with me from Pitt because he was actually going to go to Kent. And I was in his ear like, hey, come over to Akron. I'm going over to Akron. So Luke came over. And so funny side note at Pitt, you have Tyler Palka, who's the starter, who you played against in the Big 33. Then you have Luke Getsy, who's the backup. Who do you think the third-string quarterback was at the time at Pitt?
Who was it?
Joe Flacco.
Wow. Before he went to Delaware State.
Before he went to Delaware and then was a Super Bowl champion with the Ravens. So the irony of how everything is so interconnected, and then Joe Flacco and I had the same agent, Joe Linta, who was out of
JL Sports, man.
JL Sports, yeah. So it is interesting, but to win a championship at Akron, and you talk about games coming down to 1 point, the 14-13 game, Glen O'Coover, we won in Detroit at Ford Field by 1 point, 31-30. So that's where we won the game. And then we had a barn burner with Memphis when they had D'Angelo Williams at running back, who was a stud and played for the Panthers for a while. He was an all-pro guy. And we about came back and won that game. But, it was just a great year. We won the conference championship. And
do you know off the top of your head when the previous MAC championship Zip football team was? I mean, it had been a stretch, right?
Never.
It never. Okay,
so it's
that was
easy
the
to
first
remember.
time. Yeah, there you go.
It was easy to remember.
I thought that there was something along those lines, but I know that you guys brought the prominence there, but I wasn't sure if maybe back when Jason Taylor was playing or not.
And they were technically 1AA, I think, or they just moved into Division 1A. So unfortunately, and I don't say this as like a positive, unfortunately there were no conference championships prior, and there have been none after. So there have been some vying for bowl games.
Yeah.
But there have been no, MAC championships prior to.
So are you guys the greatest team in Zip football history?
I mean, I guess on paper, right? I mean, if you're going to win a championship, I actually, the next year I would say we really underperformed when we were picked to win the conference my senior year, and had some big wins. We beat NC State, the Wolfpack, with Chuck Amato as the head coach in NC State.
It's not an easy place to win, man.
As Akron, and you're the sacrificial lamb team in that game, right? Here's your check. Thanks for coming. And we went down there and beat them.
Yeah, I always thought it was cool, man. It was wild playing down there because you kind of felt like you were playing in the NFL. They had fireworks going off and the whole setting. It was like, man, this must be what the league's like.
Right. It was crazy. It was very, very good time. But yeah, to win one for the home team, to get a championship ring. My dad, my brother, my mother were there. The hat, the confetti, the whole 9 yards. So it was definitely a cherished memory.
Who won the MAC that year? Was it Northern Illinois?
The following year?
Your senior year.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
I just always remember it became so competitive. I mean, and even NIU, they kind of went on their run there with Garrett Wolf and Doug Free, who started how many years with the Dallas Cowboys. But, okay, so for you now, and it's funny, I always ask all of our guests to come on. I guess it's just a typical football question that most people that never played football want to know. What's the biggest jump? Is it from high school to college to the NFL? And most people say it's high school to college. I think it kind of is. When you've played down at NC State, you're going against a guy like McCall or Tank Tyler and those guys. You know that you're going to see them on Sundays, right? So you make the transition, the jump. You've just been playing offensive line, for like 2 years, and you're like, now I'm in the league. I'm third-round draft pick. I'm a guy that's going to be expected to perform. Even though it was another conversation I had recently, people were like, well, how low do they typically cut from their draft picks? I said, well, the year I went and signed with the Arizona Cardinals, they cut our third-round draft pick, Buster Davis from Florida State. So you're never really safe, but they're financially vested in you or interested in you. Your first taste of the NFL, what was that like? Was training camp like, do I carry the dude's helmet when he tells me to? Like the hazing, certain things. Just What was your whole mindset going into it as a third-round draft pick? And the Saints are, at that point, Saints are back. It's a prominent football team.
Yeah, so they had Sean Payton as the coach. They picked up Drew Brees in free agency. It was after Katrina. And, looking back in retrospect, they had Jahri Evans, who some would argue is a Hall of Famer.
Yes, yep.
Or at least a perennial All-Pro guy.
And I believe signed like one of the largest guard deals of all time.
The largest. And then the person who beat him out was Carl Nix, who was the other guard.
Yeah.
So, and he was an All-Pro until he got kind of a funky, I think a toe or foot injury. He signed a big deal to Tampa Bay to stay in division in free agency. But so I'm competing behind two guys who were perennial All-Pro guys. And really, when I look back in retrospect, if I said, hey, if I made any mistakes, which it's easy to say now, I should have played center right from the jump, and I shouldn't have played guard. But it was such a jump from D-line to O-line. It was like, now I'm calling out the defense, I'm snapping the ball.
And trying to step
so
all that,
I'm like, that's just too much, so just go to guard, pull me, get me in space, run zone, and that kind of worked. But it probably would have better served me to play center, which just with my size and, like I said, 295, 300-pound guy, I could get to the second level, all of that. But it ends up becoming you're kind of learning on the job. So the jump was huge. And I think the other thing for us was contextually in New Orleans, we played in the Superdome, which is indoors. But we did training camp at Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi, which to this day is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And it was over 100 degrees pretty much every day.
Brutal.
And 100% humidity. So it's not just the heat, which alone, I mean, think of the Packers. They're doing training camp in Wisconsin. We're doing training camp in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And then when I go to the Dolphins, everyone's like, man, this is the craziest training camp ever because you're doing training camp in South Florida. And I was like, this is much easier than Mississippi. So it all depended, relatively speaking. That was what was so ironic about the NFL is depending on the team you were at, just culturally, coaching, people could get by it. You could vie a couple 2 or 3 years on
the right fit.
On a little bit of context, not even just scheme, which ironically, by the time everything was said and done for me, I would sign with the Colts in free agency, had a back deal and some MCL sprain, stuff like that. But by the time I got to Indianapolis, I know we're getting a little sidetracked here, I was like, finally, this is the offense that basically is perfect for me. But at that point, it's you're far down the road and they're on to the next, and you're not being evaluated in such a way of like when you're the shiny new toy,
and you got a back deal going on.
Can't train properly.
A lot of people don't understand that, how much from a lineman standpoint, getting down into your stance. I mean, even before your back injury, we both know that you play through pain. That type of mindset, not everybody has it. Not everybody can kind of block that out. I mean, to think some of the things you actually had to play through, I mean, talk about being a mental warrior. I mean, it's not like the Chuck Norris type pain where you don't feel pain, but you know it's there, and you're basically operating on adrenaline.
Yeah, I don't know what to say other than when people ask me in the context of, do you miss playing? I don't anymore. I'm so far removed from it. I think there was a trajectory of, like, right away I was like, I don't want anything to do with it. And then some years pass and you start to miss it again, particularly the games. But when people talk about, what was it like playing through pain or how do you evaluate that, you're also in an entirely different mental psyche as a human,
right?
At that time.
You're like you're walking into the Coliseum, Gladiator.
100%. When I'm looking at people, when I'm single, I have no kids, it's like my life is like zero empathy. So I'm walking around thinking about guys like, I wish that guy would.
Yeah.
Right there. And not to sound like a terrible human, but that is the mindset of this constant state of always a little bit on edge, always a little bit, and I wasn't the best with when we were competing, and this was an immaturity thing, but I wasn't the best at like, hey, we can all be friends, and when we compete, we can. To me, it was kill or be killed.
Yep.
It was either I'm going to get this or die trying. And it was no friendships, no love loss, no hard feelings, had nothing to do with emotion. And so in the context then of playing through pain, you just do it.
Yeah.
Right? And I remember in a game when I was at Kansas City, I get traded to Kansas City. So I end the season as a starting lineman with the Dolphins. We go 11-5. We had the greatest single-season turnaround in NFL history. The year before I was with the Saints, they had only won one game. I finished the last 5 games as the starter, even though they had signed Justin Smiley in free agency from the Niners and given him a big contract. And I'm playing well. And I met with Coach Tony Sperano, and rest in peace. He's no longer with us. But he basically said, listen, we're going into the offseason now. This is my contract year, vying for a starting guard spot. Like, you've proven that you're going to be in the mix. It's not a guarantee, but the expectation is for you to be vying and competing to be our starting guard. And then I hurt my back. And then, long story short, you eventually get traded, this and that. But so now, back to your question about pain, here I am with the Chiefs, back in the starting lineup halfway through the season, and we're playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I get my knee rolled up on terribly, where I actually went down. And rarely did I ever go down, even in high school or whatever.
Did you wear braces or no?
I did not,
Okay.
no. And I did in college, but I didn't in the NFL. In the NFL, I felt like we're in a track meet. So
Yeah.
It was literally like strip it down. I was basically like, there's nothing on but shoulder pads,
Yep.
and my hands and wrists
And I can move.
were like ready to fight.
Yeah.
And shoulder pad, and everything else was just kind of like, we're basically running like a 100-meter dash here, So I go down, they take me off, and I told the trainer, I said, listen, I don't care what you have to give me or whatever. If I come out of the game, I may not go back in the game. And not just this week, but that's the kind of state of pressure. So playing through pain and all of that, I mean, I've broken my thumbs and dislocated fingers and stingers and concussions, and I had to get my elbow scoped and just all sorts of crazy stuff. But, in the context of all of that, I've never had a major reconstructive surgery. So people laugh. They're like, have you been injured? I'm like, no, because none of that counts.
Yeah.
Like in the NFL, it's like, did you blow out your knee? Did you tear your pec? Did you, shred your labrum?
Right.
It's like, no, I haven't had like my pec, rip off my chest bone. So I don't count the ankles, the knees and stuff, the sprains.
Yeah.
So in that,
Try blocking Casey Hampton with a broken thumb.
yeah, you know what I mean? And so that was just something that I guess it was kind of, you're always on edge, you're always fighting for a job. And I think part of it was a maturity thing. Part of it was having an outlet to know how to decompress. And those things I just struggled with, because it was when you're constantly if I don't have an enemy, I'll create an enemy in my mind.
Yeah.
That's not a sustainable way to live life. Even if it's in the context of sports, I think that can get you, from point A to point B. But I think a lot of things psychologically, what I've learned as I've gotten older is, what got you here to here doesn't necessarily mean going from here to here is the same mindset. You can apply some of the principles, but sometimes what you realize is it's not that was a bad way. It's just that there's a better way.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but when you're in the mix and it's competition, cut, there's no time to really think through all that unless you have.
Go hard or go home.
Yeah, and that's what it is, right? So you just kind of go out there. We're going to battle. It was, and I don't say this to be, we weren't getting shot at or to take some, to act like I was like a soldier or something like that, the Kellen Winslow quote. But I felt like, hey, I'm not here to be friends with anybody. I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm going out here to try to rip this guy's head off.
Right.
I mean, that's really what it is.
I guess the comparison you're trying to make is it's probably the closest thing to war minus the bullets.
Sure.
And going down like that. You talk about that season with the Dolphins, and I feel like from what I remember just off my history, did you guys were in a playoff game that year? Was that against the Ravens?
It was. Yeah, we had a home game.
Okay.
Because we clinched the AFC East, so we went and played the Jets at their place in a night game, clinched the division with the Hats. So, I mean, for me, it was like a repeat in college throwing on the championship hat. We won the AFC East. We clinched a home game versus the Ravens. You know, and then that game, you know, we had several turnovers. Ed Reed was running around, you know, picking off the ball every 2 seconds. So, you know, on that defense, you've got Ed Reed. You have Ray Lewis. You have Terrell Suggs. You have Haloti Nagata. You have Pryor, the defensive tackle, I believe his last name. Yeah, I mean, you just had a bunch of studs on that team. You had that special teams guy who was like a beast at linebacker.
I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Yeah, I don't remember his last name. He had that long last name. But yeah, you know, and we ended up losing that game. But the playoffs at Dolphins Stadium was crazy. They were waving the white towel, which was equivalent to, like, you know, the terrible towel up here in you know, Pittsburgh Steeler country. But fortunately, we lost the game. But it was an incredible experience. And for me, I hold that game near and dear to my heart among several games, because you just get to a point. I remember it was actually earlier that year, unrelated. I think we were playing the 49ers, and I was playing against Justin Smith, who was with the Bengals for a while, and then the 49ers.
Freak.
Yeah, who was a total stud. And you know, the coach, like, you know, hey, you got to, you know, your footwork here, you're this, you're that. And then it just kind of dawned on me, like, you know, we're in the NFL.
Right.
Like, at some point, I got to say, that guy's a pretty good player.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm scared. It's not that I'm nervous. It's not that I don't show him proper respect or I show him too much respect. It just comes down to, well, there's 32 teams. That guy's pretty good. And we're battling it out. And so you get to a point mentally where, well, what was it like playing against Ray Lewis? And what was it like? It wasn't like anything. I went out there to destroy them.
Just playing a game.
No matter who it was, I went there to seek and destroy, period. Now, does that mean I had a Hall of Fame career? No. But when you get to a point psychologically that it's not about impressing your parents, it's not about impressing a coach, it's not about being beloved by the fans or doing it for a reporter or this or that, and you really truly, as a man at night, can go to bed and say, listen, I went out there, and I mean, I just went for it, and it was what it was. And that's a huge life lesson and a maturity and a growing experience. So then when you're married, you have kids, you have work, and life takes different turns, and you're in a different context. I feel like, hey, mentally, it doesn't matter what you have me do. I'll just figure it out and do it.
Yeah.
You know?
Andy Alleman joining us here on 1372 Show, the QB and the OG. We're talking psychology here today. I feel like you and I were wired a lot alike, and I really appreciated what you said just before that, because it took me a lot of years and a lot of mistakes to figure out that, yeah, there used to be this way of getting from point A to point B. Don't need to do that anymore. There's a better and easier way to do it, instead of making it harder on yourself by still trying to just be that, you know what, I'm the badder dog than you. Let's just fight this thing out. So, you know, the psychology and the mindset, the makeup, and how many people now have, I mean, the mental side, the mental health side of athletes more than anybody. Offensive, defensive linemen who are expected to be these tough, big, bad dudes. Nothing hurts you. You're indestructible. And it's just not true. We're all still human beings at the end of the day. And again, just, I'm not going to sit here and ask you what it was like blocking Ray Lewis, but those collision points, you know, you're doing a lot of pulling. When you think back to some of those moments where, when we talk about injuries and head trauma to guys, and it's in a window, that box of guards pulling around and hitting linebackers, where you're hitting a 260 guy running a 4.4, 4.5, colliding into a 305-pounder who's running a 5 flat and is stronger than a Sherman tank. When you have those impact points, you can feel it, and you never really forget it. Is there one moment in particular that you sit back and remember, that was the hardest hit I was ever a part of in my life? I'll never forget that moment.
Well, there were probably several, and just depending on different levels, even from pee-wee football to high school football. You know, I remember in college, I played against Corey Mays when he was at Notre Dame, and then we were teammates with the Chiefs. And I mean, I hit him, so it was probably my biggest hit that I delivered someone in college. I thought I KO'd him on the field. I mean, just absolutely smoked him on kickoff return, you know.
Well, you had a starting.
And I'm 255. And I'm 255.
You got about 30 yards starting.
No hesitation, ear hole. But then I was in the Rutgers game. I got KO'd. Not knocked out cold, but I was knocked out on kickoff return. So a lot of that stuff, they still had the 4-man wedge, and it was basically the scene out of Braveheart. And then they said, wait a minute here. Like, we did the statistical analysis. We have all the analytics now, and we realize that people are getting knocked unconscious or concussed on kickoff and kickoff return. There's got to be a better way. But then in the context of pulling and those things, yeah, they were devastating. I remember we were playing the Oakland Raiders, and they had some big old boy at linebacker, and I pulled, and I mean, he smoked me in the hole. I mean, my legs buckled, where it was like I'm on the field thinking to myself, that's going to look so bad when like it's actually, I'm embarrassed thinking like, man, when we replay this.
When they drop the lights and that projector goes on,
I'm like,
boy.
man, this one is, because then the running back just, I think it was Ronnie Brown. He's like, he just kind of shakes his head like he's disgusted with you. I'm disgusted with myself. But there were just some randoms, right? You know.
And there was a stud. I wonder if it was the same guy that we played against. He was at San Diego State, Kirk Morrison, who played linebacker for them, I think, for like 15-some years. Just an absolute freak. Talk a little bit more about running backs. I believe, I think you blocked for one of my college running backs, Antonio Pittman. Was he there in New Orleans with you?
He was, yes. He was a fellow. He was I believe he was a 4th-round pick. He was a running back. He and I connected really well. We actually, because again, it was like Junction Boys in Millsaps College, which is like a Division III college, and the whole thing is spread out. So the rookies got dressed in a trailer. It was a double wide. So if the psychology wasn't bad enough, Antonio Pittman was there, and I remember a quick funny caveat on him was the guys told us, like, listen, you better get like a scooter or like a little moped. I'm like, a moped? Like, for what? You know, like, I'm not riding around. I'm a grown man. Like, how stupid am I going to look on a moped, you know? So I'm thinking to myself, I'll walk. I'm not, that's soft. That's ridiculous. I'm not riding around on a moped. And then my second year, I'm like, I'm getting a moped because I'm locking up, getting cramps. Because you're walking, you're adding 2-3 miles of just walking, legs locked up on the sidewalk. So we get mopeds, and I remember Antonio, I think he had a moped as well. And I come out one day, and everyone's doing everything they can to get their mopeds jammed in the shade. But everyone has the same model and color moped because they went to Sam's Club or BJ's or whatever it was down south and bought these things. And so I come out, and my moped's leaning, and I'm like, all right, somebody's messing with it. There's always somebody who's
somebody take a seat off of it.
Yeah, somebody's got the extra energy after practice to do some stupid stuff. And I come up on it, and the kickstand is about 2 inches into the asphalt because it was so hot that the kickstand went through the blacktop or the asphalt. And you talk about, like, being psychologically buried and playing. And I remember, and I feel like I was telling Antonio this or just guys around us, and they're just to get that glazed over deer in the headlight look like, man, like, we're really about to go out there again and do this. We were doing QB center exchange, and my ankle brace pops like this. I had one of those ones that ratcheted across.
Yeah.
I had the Velcro. I'm like, man, what the heck? So I go down, and I'm like, oh, what's going on? And the adhesive of the Velcro is sliding. Like, I'm grabbing it with my glove, and it's going like this on the plastic.
Just melting away.
Because the glue on the back of the Velcro melted that kept it on the plastic. This isn't a joke either. This is no joke. So then I go to take white, just your typical 1.5 inch white athletic tape that you're taping your ankle. Would not stick. Too humid. So here we go. I have my ankle brace pops off. We haven't even made contact with anybody yet.
We're just doing center exchange.
I can't even get the tape to stick on the plastic because it's too humid. And so it's just, it's stuff like this that it's like, man, that was crazy. Like, I don't know what like Navy SEAL training and Green Beret stuff is like, but this is about, I mean, that had me questioning my whole life, like football. I'm not even, and that's just being honest.
It's intense.
And this wasn't like, I wasn't a guy that was like shying away from stuff, but I'm sitting there thinking like, I'm just thinking, waking up like, how is this guy even in the NFL for 6 or 7 years?
See, you went through Don Hurtler two-a-days, so I figured you were like, you were prepared for anything. You talk about Navy SEAL training. I mean, if you can do Don Hurtler two-a-days,
that
you
was
can make
like
it
a
through
walk in
anything.
the park. I mean, when the Don Hurtler two-a-days becomes a walk in the park, that's when you're like,
seriously,
like, what's going on here? Maybe we should have somebody investigate this, get some third party in here. But it was just bizarre. So we would call it. We would just laugh about it. We had a guy on the team, Hollis Thomas, big old nose guard, played in the league forever. I think a couple all-pro deals maybe with the Eagles. But he used to say Jackson, Mississippi is where the strong get weak and the weak just die. So that, like, it's that type of mentality where just literally like humor just gets you through. And they had some fan, because we had Drew Brees, you know, Brees, and he put, there's only one Breeze in Jackson, Mississippi, because there is no type of wind, nobody even like blowing like on your neck. So even when I was in Florida, you at least get a semblance of a breeze, even though it's super hot.
Little island breeze,
but it's
coming
just,
off the water.
It was just moisture and just dead heat. And I saw that sign, and I'm like, man, that's the truth. I'm just looking at the sign and thinking, like, that's true. Like, there's no breeze out here.
Those are the dog days of summer, man, and as cold as it is out here right now in Canton, Ohio, man, I'll tell you what, you actually miss it for just a second, and then thinking about all the work that goes into it. Boy, I'll tell you what a career, what a run you had, man. I appreciate you joining me on the show today, telling us some of the stories, some of the ins and outs of not only the NFL, but just kind of how your path may have been different from somebody else's. So, again, appreciate you dropping by and sharing the knowledge with us.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right, Andy Alleman joining us on 1372 Show, the QB and the OG. We'll be back more.